Welcome to Mysterious Universe, Season 34, Episode 9. Coming up on the show, we've got the Psi Decline Effect, the Middle River Corridor, and Fooling the Spider Prototype. I'm your host, Benjamin Grundy. Joining me is Aaron Wright.
What's this corridor?
It's like a window area.
Oh, right, like the John Keelian style window areas.
Yeah, in Baltimore, Maryland, or East Baltimore, I should say. It's a new book called The Mysterious Middle River by Joshua S. Bell. Some additional material supplied by Dolores Bell. I don't know if that's his wife or his family member, maybe not related. But this is one of these books, you see these all the time where it's focusing on a very specific area.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you'll
like
see...
The Land Between the Lands, for example.
Oh, you see these books all the time, like The Monsters of Wisconsin.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And they always suck. They're always the same.
Not always, but...
You know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
It's like the McDonald's of paranormal books. It lists the well-known cases. You know, you get a bunch of cryptid reports. And
all the classics.
When I first saw this, I thought, okay, well, this is just going to be the same, but it's just Baltimore. What's happened in Baltimore? I was so wrong.
Really?
This is a really interesting investigation, and it starts with Joshua's experience that he had as a teenager in the mid-90s, where him and some friends are, joyriding as they do at night. And they went out to this road that kind of ends in a military base, and they got to the sign that says no trespassing, cameras, U.S. Army jurisdiction, blah, blah, blah.
Very imposing.
And so they turned the car around, and Josh said him and a friend, for some reason, they just really needed to pee at that moment. So they convinced their friend to pull over and let him out of the car. And so the friend is like, there's no way you're getting out here. This is in the middle of nowhere. There's just forest everywhere. There's axe murderers out here. You'll get killed. I don't want to stop. It's too freaky. And they said, you're crazy.
It is crazy. What? There's no axe murderers out on a random road in the middle of the night.
Stop being a pussy. So they get out to pee, and they want to play a prank on him. So they just go deep into the forest, way further than you would need to go to pee, just to kind of mess with their friend who's in the car. And they said they're out there, and they start doing their business, and they hear footsteps. And eventually they see a figure, and it's a full moon that night, so they could clearly see it. And they described it as like a very thin, hunched over, pale, tall, bald man who's just like watching them from the shadows.
Is it wearing clothing?
Well, that's the thing. They said they couldn't quite make it out because it was still dark, but they swear he was just nude. He wasn't wearing anything. Really thin, really pale, big bald head. And they said the way it moved, like it was maintaining eye contact with them the whole time. But the way it moved was really strange. They said it sort of almost like a crab, like it was going side to side, but getting closer and closer to them.
Yeah.
So they noped the hell out of there, ran back to their friends, said, drive, got out of there. And I'll show you the location and everything on Google Maps later and where this is. So this was in 1994. And they had, for years, like they went back there a couple of days later, no tracks, no sign of anything.
In the daylight, obviously.
There were no reported sightings of this thing that they had come across until it was about a decade later, they saw this thing popping up all over the internet. The exact description of this creature popping up everywhere associated with creepypasta fiction.
Mm.
And they're like, no, we saw this in the 90s. This was not creepypasta fiction. We physically saw this. And so it introduces this interesting idea of, characters like the Slender Man.
Yes.
Where
emerging from the ethos of thought and actually becoming something that people, can interact with.
Yeah, there's something that precedes actual physical sightings of the phenomena, and it comes from the so-called imagination of the creators, the imagination of people.
I was reading about something very similar to that today, and I wasn't going to include it here, but where is it? Because it made me think about, just this dance that we have, right? And one of the themes which has been coming up on the show recently really has been this dance back and forward between, well, is it real? Or is it generated within the mind? Or even the next step, is it real because it's been generated by the mind?
Right.
Like this weird thought form kind of thing. But you do find when you look into many of these stories, you find that it's like this weird paradox. It's like an event takes place, but then it was preceded by people thinking about it. And so where is this story? I can't find it. From the top of my head, from what I recall, it was the story of a guy who was sitting down in his living room, and there was something boring on television. And so he wasn't really paying attention. It was more that he had the television on just so he could get some noise in the background. And I don't know if he had a pad and a pen there because of the phone or something, because it was an older story, right? It's a much older story before mobile phones. But he reaches over and he picks up this pad and he starts scribbling, just doodling and drawing, as one does. But as your mind is free, because you're in this kind of flow-like state because you're bored and you're not really paying attention to anything. It's very similar to what happens when people get that highway hypnosis.
Yeah.
And we hear so, often as well of people having experiences with dogmen or Bigfoot on the side of the road or even ghostly apparitions. It often happens when someone's been driving for a long period of time and they're in this kind of boring flow state.
Just an altered state. Yeah.
It's like an altered state, but it's a state of nothingness from which springs something. But anyway, with this particular incident, he was just doodling and he just left it and his mother came home later on. And when his mother came home, she had this huge scrapbook. So it was much later in the evening. The evening news was on and she's going through this scrapbook. And as he's like, "What are you doing?" She's like, "Oh, I'm just, going through an old scrapbook that I found today." And she's like, "Look at this." And she spins around. And she shows him this picture of some guy that was in a newspaper clipping. And she's like, "Oh, this is your great Uncle Frank who died, 50, 60 years ago." And he's like, hang on a second. And he looks down, right? And in that drawing that he was doodling, he drew that image of
drew Uncle Frank.
He drew Uncle Frank. He actually called the figure Frank, and it had this big top hat on it, and he drew this top hat, right? So maybe it's a coincidence that he somehow drew this man, and he had just a really strong coincidence, except for the fact that he had also drawn Frank standing in front of this castle on fire. It was like an actual castle in the background that he'd kind of drawn in, and it was on fire behind him. Now he looks up at the television, and guess what's on the news? Or there was a fire at some castle somewhere in the UK. And so he's holding up the piece of paper, looking at the picture, looking at that, and what his mother had just shown him. So it's like, how did that happen? Surely that can't be a coincidence, but it was like the shock of it, right? The shock of it caused him to be like, how is that possible? What am I seeing? But I wonder if somehow that radiated back into the past, and that's what caused him to draw it. He was drawing events that would shock him later on in the future, and that was the initiator for that experience.
Yeah, where does the inspiration for the creation come from?
Yeah.
And that leads back to the question of these so-called creepypasta entities. Because you do have this scenario, you do have this phenomena where people do start to report so-called genuine sightings. They do mention a case from John Keel's The Mothman Prophecies, although they didn't have the specific details. And I can't quite recall this from Keel's book. But apparently there was a UFO sighting while he was investigating in West Virginia.
Yeah, there was. There was plenty.
Obviously, there was plenty of sightings, but there was a very
you mean a particular one?
Very specific one that the configuration of the UFO was so incredibly unique. It's not something you would see normal. It's not a saucer shape. It's not a cigar shape. It's not a triangle. Or something very unique and bizarre. And it just so happened that this was a design of a spacecraft that a science fiction author had created during this time period. Now, it wasn't released till later, but he was working on it at around that time.
And no doubt, Keel must have seen that later on, and he would have been shocked by it, and it would have initiated, I don't know, because as I always say with this kind of phenomenon, it's like it has no timeline. We look at it from this linear timeline, but it doesn't do that. It looks far beyond that. So can that be expanded from just an individual having an experience to more of a collective consciousness effect?
Well, the great thing about this book, Mysterious Middle River, is that Joshua and Dolores Bell, they collate all these case reports together. And again, they're convinced there's like a window area here in East Baltimore. But they also understand this connection between the psyche and the consciousness and this strange paranormal activity.
Yeah.
And they break down a bunch of cases, and you'll see this pattern emerge where there'll be some kind of fictional creation, some kind of fictional idea that either precedes or follows some kind of real, genuine paranormal activity. So looking forward to going into it. It's more than just here's the 10 things that happened in my state books.
No, I'm not surprised in the least. And the reason why I think certain areas are more prone to being genuine window areas is because people have encounters with a variety of entities that don't fit the normal standard supernatural being, right? And certainly that thing, whatever it was, back in 1994, was not consistent with what people were reporting.
Do you remember the one from Nick Redfern? I was racking my brain trying to remember it today, where it's out on the moors somewhere and there's a pterodactyl sighting. Do you remember this case?
Oh, vaguely.
It's like there's a bunch of weird UFO phenomenon, but amongst it is these guys see a pterodactyl.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
And it just so happened that again, it's like a similar story. At the same time, totally unrelated to these events and removed from them geographically, was a science fiction writer in England.
That's right, writing about pterodactyls.
Writing about pterodactyls and portals opening up, and these guys have claim they experienced it on the moor. They were both seeing UFOs and pterodactyls.
This starts tying in with these ideas that, our reality is not what we perceive it to be, that it's far more complex, and that our thoughts and our actions as well actually can influence that reality for not only ourselves, but other people around us. And this is why it's actually so dangerous to, mess with things and also ignore it and get so caught up in materialism, because you're actually affecting other people without even realizing it. Now, it might be, a guy sees a pterodactyl, big deal, but that's changed his entire perception now of reality. Like that person who undergoes that experience, they're totally changed. And that actually highlights what I'm going to be talking about in today's book that I wanted to cover, because I picked this up actually this morning. I was going to do something completely different. And I happened to see that there is a pre-order out for Chasing the Dark: Encounters with the Supernatural by Ben Machell. Now,
how did you get this early, cheeky?
I got it through Kobo, actually, of all places.
Got the Kobo exclusive.
Got the Kobo exclusive. So I think in some areas, I believe in the US it is already available. But if you're in the UK or Australia, it's not available unless you go through Kobo. But the reason why I picked up this book is because at first I just thought, it's going to be another story of some supernatural researcher.
I like how that's our attitude to
I don't care. I just
here we go.
Here we go.
Another 300 pages.
Well, it is. It's a heavy book, but it's really well written. And it's the story behind it is actually really intriguing because it relates to the files of Tony Cornell. Now, Tony Cornell was someone who was instrumental with the Society for Psychical Research. He was also with the later one, which was the CUSPR, which is the Cambridge University Society for Psychical Research. He was one of these, and not often spoken about, I must say. I don't think he gets enough credit, but he was one of these leading boots-on-the-ground researchers that you just don't get these days.
Right.
And he would go to people's homes. He would start hearing about people describing their experiences. People would reach out to the Society for Psychical Research, and of course, they'd be referred to him. Because most of the time it would be ghostly apparitions in people's homes, phantoms, a lot of poltergeist stuff going on. But he would go and help people because it was at a time where I know that he was born in the 1920s, I believe. And it was 1920s. But he really was at the forefront of where that stuff was. After the First World War, there was a boom, obviously, in psychical interest because of so many young people being sent off to war and dying. People wanted to get in contact with their loved ones. And so that interwar period really had this spike in supernatural interest, but not only supernatural interest, more so connecting with loved ones that had passed over. So people wanted to know about, is there an afterlife? Are there ghosts? And so, of course, things like seances really took off. But with that, you had a whole heap of people that were exploitative, that were making stuff up, and a lot of people would really fall for it. So this particular book, it focuses not so much on some of Tony's published works, but more Ben has gone into the library, the university library, and has requested these documents, right? And he's pulled out this, he said it was on a drizzly afternoon in spring of 2023.
Did you load the book into the AI and say, give me the bangers?
No, I didn't do that. No, I didn't. I thought about it.
You did it manually?
I did it manually. I read the whole book. And when you do that,
brutal.
The problem is, whenever I've tried that in the past, first of all, it only works with stuff where you've had the optical character recognition work, and it misses stuff.
Yeah, it just makes stuff up.
Yeah, it makes stuff up.
What do you got for me?
So what he's done is he's gone into the special collections room of the Cambridge University Library, and he's requested this box that just simply had Cornell written on it. And the Cornell box is all of his leftover research. It's his faded textbooks and notes, photographs. He says that when I start pulling stuff out of this file, out of this box, there was random typed reports, things like, is emotion a psychic trigger? He said, I placed it on the table beside me and continued to dig, and I found faded foolscaps folders with telepathy, apparitions, and precognition written on it. I kept going. There are several spiral-bound shorthand notepads. One had the word spontaneous cases written on it in biro, accompanied by timestamps. This
treasure trove.
It is a treasure trove of experiences. So immediately I was like, this is cool because it's the unpublished stuff that he's gone through. And I'm going to say it right now so people don't get too upset about it. It is not what I expected. He was extremely skeptical, extremely skeptical. And in a lot of cases, which I'll give you answers for, in a lot of cases, he found that they were forgeries. They were fakes. They were hoaxes.
This is Cornell, the parapsychologist.
This is Cornell. This is Tony Cornell and what he found. And look, but the thing was, he was very reasoned as well in going about this. And this is what I like about him, because I'm not too familiar with his work. But he was certainly willing to give people the benefit of the doubt, but stuck around long enough in their homes with them while these things were allegedly taking place. And it was really disappointing in some sense.
What's an example of one that was just
I'll give you
complete write-off?
Oh, pretty much all of them.
Really?
Yeah, pretty much all of them. But I'll get into it because the only thing that I'll say is that there's this thing that you and I picked up with paranormal phenomena a long time ago, is that in some ways, the intelligence behind the phenomenon deliberately undermines people, like witnesses when they're investigated, to make it seem like it's a hoax so that the phenomena can somehow allow itself to stay in the shadows. It's really strange. And that seems to be what's going on here, because you do have a number of cases where people come across as really genuine, extremely genuine, but the phenomenon undermines them. And makes it.
All right, I'm intrigued.
Okay, so let's jump into it. So he says, look, there's a whole heap of things in here. There's like rotting photo albums containing pages of eerie Edwardian era spirit photographs of disembodied faces floating in faded sepia, strange cards marked with monochrome symbols, a series of letters with Soviet stamps and postmarks, because he was dealing with Leningrad University in the 1960s, talking about, essentially their Psi research at the time as well. There's a lot of really strange things in here, but he says amongst these more extreme examples, there's a lot of reports here from ordinary people, just ordinary people that have encountered really strange things that they don't know how to deal with it or what to do with it. So Tony Cornell, between 1950 and his death in 2010, he was one of the most prolific parapsychologists. Like, he would investigate anything that he could, and he did it well. And in this book, Ben says, I first encountered the name Tony Cornell when I was myself drawn into the world of psychical research some 6 months earlier. He said, it began with a visit to my grandmother's house. She was ill. She was dying, sadly. And because she was practically, minded as a woman, she began pointing out items around the house that I could have when she was gone. So a lot of older people do that. I've seen that happen. But he said amongst these items was a crystal ball. This is what got Ben interested. And this crystal ball, he said, I'd always known about it since I was a young child, because my grandmother would bring it out and she would let me hold it. And he said it was cold and heavy in my hands, but it belonged to my aunt, who seemed to possess a supernatural gift of foresight, right? This sets the tone for the book, though, because he's like, my aunt would get hold of this crystal ball and she would scry into it. She would look into it and she would announce that, oh, we're going to have this unexpected visitor. We're going to have a distant relative who's going to visit. So she'd be like, chop, chop. And she'd tell people to rush out, buy the very best pork chops for the occasion that they can, would set up the dinner table, and everyone would sit and wait with their pork chops in front of them, waiting for a knock that would never come. And he's like, I began to believe that it's possible. And my grandmother conceded that this particular aunt just really liked pork chops, right? So she didn't have this weird.
Yeah.
It was a
ruse.
It was a ruse.
Yeah.
But a lot of this stuff,
gag.
a lot of this stuff comes up because in his research, this is Tony's research. It was like there's a phenomenon known as, like, it's not a hysterical personality disorder. It's not that extreme, but it is like people can be fantasists. Like, there's a certain subset of the population that have this particular type of their way that their mind works, that they can easily drop into fantasy. Right? But they're also very creative, and they can imagine things and they can create things. But people go, well, this certain subset of people, they're fantasists. They're making up stories. They're more likely to believe these sorts of things. This is why Psi and all those seances and that sort of, stuff continues to have this small stream of interest, because there's always going to be a 2 to 4% group of the population
that
will fall
tracks.
for this stuff.
It'd definitely be higher in this field.
Absolutely. But at the same time, right, there's been research into this by people like the Society for Psychical Research and other leading Psi researchers, where that same group of people do have a demonstrably higher Psi ability. So it's like, is it the imagination generating the Psi, or is the Psi a side effect of the imagination, or is it just simply because you have Psi abilities, you're capable of seeing things in other realms that people can't? It's it's a very difficult thing to work out. But you can't just immediately be like, oh no, those people are making it up, because they seemingly do have some type of bodies. Now, he said, I fell down this rabbit hole of stories of research. I was hunched over my laptop reading about ectoplasms and disembodied voices, but I came across a reference to a man who had visited dozens of seances and investigated other potentially supernatural events. And of course, this was Cornell. And Cornell would show up at these disturbances, these poltergeist houses, and a suit and tie, carrying a bag containing notepads, tape recorders, cameras, and on occasion, homemade instruments, and would speak to the people.
It says here he researched over 800 cases.
He did. Yeah, he did. So, we know a lot about SPR. I won't go into greater detail. It was formed in 1882. Of course, Cornell was an investigator of this, but he focused very much on spontaneous cases. These were cases where he would return time and time again to unsettling spaces that exist just on the periphery of our ordered, tidy world. And that's so true, right? Because we do ignore so many of these things. We just go, oh, that's absurd, or someone's making that up, or, I don't believe that. All very easy things to say, not when your bedroom and entire house is being flooded by some weird ejection of water in the middle of the night from some weird poltergeist that's moving through your home. And of course, water is a big factor with poltergeist. And many of these cases that he investigated, he'd go to people's homes. He went to one particular home where the entirety of the downstairs, all the carpet had been ripped up. And he's like, why did you rip up the carpet? And she's like, because we've had the house checked. We've had plumbers. We've had builders come and have a look. We don't know, but we would go to bed, we'd get up in the morning, and the house would be flooded downstairs. But there's no source for this water.
Wow.
None whatsoever.
Water just coming in from another dimension.
Right. But guess what they had in the house? A 13 or 14-year-old girl, right? So, which is connected with this trope of poltergeist being connected with a 13 to 14 or, a young girl going through puberty. But strangely enough, a lot of this book, a section of this book, I should say, focus on the idea that no, it's these kids being troublesome, that it's just naughty girls and occasionally naughty boys that are creating this thing. But the thing is, in many of these cases that have been investigated by Cornell, it was like water would be thrown randomly. And it'd be like, well, the girl would be upstairs doing her homework. And it's like, well, she's not doing that. And yet, people that were skeptical at the time would be like, oh, no, it's just the kids doing it. One incredible example of where you can't say that it was a child was at one particular house that had a poltergeist infestation, is the way to describe it, when things would go flying past and there'd be weird voices and weird noises. They came downstairs one day to find water flowing through their kitchen, but the water was actually flowing across the bottom of the floor and then up the wall. So it was going against physics as we know it. But huge amounts of water, but no source for it whatsoever. And of course, these people, they're not people that are inclined to be involved in supernatural phenomena, although I must say in a few of the cases, you do find out very quickly that, and this is part of the way that he's very, has a protocol and how he investigates things. Have you recently or not been using an Ouija board? And of course, what do you think happens every time? They've been using some talking board, the spirit board.
Secretly demon worshipping on Sundays. Yeah. Every second Sunday, we worship demons.
Yeah. No, but that doesn't have anything to do with the poltergeist. Like that doesn't make any sense. Of course it does. Like, of course these things play a role. But yeah, so this kind of stuff was going on. He highlights one of these earlier cases as well. He said there was a family that was living near a rural home that reported that there was a malign power taking over their home, and Cornell, of course, was dispatched. This is a normal family. He arrives to find a terrified mother, father, and son in a bungalow where light fixtures would swing back and forth unaccountably. They'd burst without warning. Small fires would break out suddenly but persistently. Plumbing screws seemed to undo themselves, causing pipes to loosen and flooding to occur. Houseplants would wither and die, and pets would fare no better. And one of the most horrible things about this is that they had 5 puppies, and within 2 weeks they had all died. But they'd all died in this very strange way, in that they would yelp as if they'd been shot.
Oh no!
And then would expire. But there was no cause.
That's awful.
To it. Really awful. So this isn't kids, right? And that's like, I don't like that argument that it's one, it's a kid that's faking it for attention, or two, that it's completely psychokinetic and connected to the emotional disturbances of a child. Maybe some cases, maybe some, but many of these cases don't seem to have that. And yeah, I mean, here we go as well, with one particular incident. He said, over the course of a weekend with the family, interviewing them and observing their lives, Cornell concluded that the 13-year-old daughter was somehow connected to the center of events. She admitted that she sometimes felt jealous of the attention that her parents lavished upon their younger brother. She denied that she'd had anything to do with the strange appearance of water that often caused her family to sleep on camp beds in the living room. But she also admitted that sometimes she and a friend played with an Ouija board. So I'm like,
oh, there it is, isn't it?
So it's like, it may be like, yeah, you could go, well, she's got jealousy.
Mm.
So this is like some weird, PK psychokinetic, anger, but she's playing with an Ouija board. So I don't think that's what's going on there. But of course, week after week, month after month, year after year, Cornell and SPR colleagues sought out these events, trying to find out what was unfolding in many homes across the entirety of the country, attempting to deduce what exactly was happening. And the thing about this guy that I really like, and much of this book, and this is why I like the way that Ben has approached this, is that it's looking at how stuff was researched back then and how stuff is researched now. And back then, you had this rather, I'm not saying that he is, but the perception that you get of him, he's this rather stuffy English guy who's very much caught up in a non-emotional way of going into these homes and like, yes, well, let's describe what's happening. Like, not this, oh my God, I felt like there was like something touching me and I'm going to get this, I'm going to put it on TikTok. Like, it's a complete contrast. Like,
yeah, he's not filming a reality TV show being the key difference there.
Correct. But even now, it's like with researchers, like towards the end of the book, and I can say it now, but it's like the Sci itself, like interest in Sci, from the 1940s and then probably the following 40 years, it just declined to nothing.
Mm.
Like to the point where it's like, is this the end of the supernatural and the supernormal? Because you would have it that SPR would be contacted, 40, 50 times a week. Then it dropped down and dropped down and dropped down. Now it's zero. Like it's pretty much zero for the most part, because it's all kind of moved. It's all been digitized in a way. So you get people going onto forums, but the difference is you don't have someone coming out to your home talking to you, and like getting an understanding, a feeling of what's going on. You might have people that come and swarm over sites with a mobile phone or camera equipment, but they're not there about the person. And very much it became apparent to me in this book and Cornell's research is that supernatural phenomena we commonly forget is about the person. It's about what's going on with that person. And that becomes really apparent in many of these cases. So
so often the supernatural, the supernormal, paranormal, it's a spiritual issue.
Yeah. It's absolutely a spiritual issue. It's an emotional issue. And so when this guy came out, and I said he was stuffy before, but it wasn't that it's so much that he was stuffy. That's just the protocol, right? But he'd also show empathy to these people that were genuinely scared, and he would try to understand what's happening with them. That doesn't happen anymore because it's not about the person. It's about trying to get this rabid pursuit of the proof of it, which we will never get because it's built into the phenomenon itself to prevent us from being able to do that. So because we have changed this, we're actually even further away. And oddly enough as well, you'll find that actual interactions, like these sorts of like poltergeist encounters, they've all significantly dropped off as well. Significantly so. And I think if it's a spiritual thing, it's because that darkness, that more negativity of spiritual phenomena that people, and that's what poltergeist activity tends to be. It tends to be more negative, right? And when you talk about things like the Enfield haunting, for example, which people know well, I'll link to an article about it if you want to check it out. Of course, he did some research into that as well. But that stuff is terrifying. But that doesn't so much happen now. It's now crept into other areas of the world. Like the world's got a whole, like you can just look, you can just see that there's a whole heap of spirit attachment going on. People are crazy.
Demons are out in the open now.
Exactly. Yeah,
like poltergeist would be something that's hidden away, very on the fringe. But now it's just look at movies, look at games, look at any kind of media. It's just completely infested with demonic imagery. Monsters,
the way people
demons.
think, the way people are now immoral, the way that people now think that
just
don't
everywhere.
consider other people. Yeah, it's that, and that's what's changed.
And obviously, I know this is a trope to say this, but what people would find abhorrent 60, 70 years ago is just accepted now.
Yeah.
In entertainment and the like, it's just accepted as something that's fun, kooky.
Yeah.
People like to be scared.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a problem though, because it's pushing us even further away. And also this relentless march towards materialism. I know I harp on about it, but it really has. It's like we had this need after the world wars because they were so traumatic to the entire, like to our species as a whole, that it did cause people to want to seek out that more spiritual side of things, like because we did want to know. And now that's kind of gone. It's right. People still want to know, but it's not in the same way. And I don't think it's for the same reasons. I think now it's like trying to prove something and you'll become famous because you're the discoverer of it, as opposed to it being a personal experience for you to connect with a loved one who you greatly miss. It's gone from being a very personal, individual thing to being something which is clouded, I suppose, by this search for perhaps fame and wealth that might, but trust me though, every researcher of this, there's no wealth. Like poor Cornell, he almost lost, well, I think he lost one of his first marriages, as his first marriage as a result of this, because he just got so caught up in it.
It's funny you say that because I was looking at the author, Ben Machell. There's an article about him in the Times. Well, it's actually written by him. I'm obsessed with the paranormal. My wife says I've lost the plot.
Right. Yeah. And this is what happens to people. It's like it does. It even
Who cares what your wife says?
well,
Seriously, come on.
if you're broke,
My wife said I'm not allowed to listen to Mysterious Universe anymore.
maybe. But yeah, so let's get into these things. So he says, look, he says there's incredibly detailed questionnaires. This is Ben writing. About people that were involved in these cases. And this is a thing as well. Like he would get into detailed psychological profiles about each individual that was encountered so he could get a clear picture of what this, what was causing this frightening effect to take place. And early in the book, he describes this particular case actually where a group of people, they want to contact they use an Ouija board, essentially, right? And it really is this old trope because they start using a Ouija board. And when they do so, though, they apply dishwashing liquid to the top of it so that it's just an overturned cup, but if any of them were trying to apply extra pressure to move it in a certain direction, their finger would move. So for them, that was adding this element of it's not any one of them pushing it around. So they start talking to this spirit board, essentially, and they get things like David comes through and they find out that David is like a cousin who sadly passed away at 16 and, that they were kind of happy about this. So this is Samantha who was, describing this. She's there with the other family members and friends. And the next session that they hold, more voices, when I say voices though, just more things, people, entities start coming through. And one of them, they get this snippet, and the snippet is something like, you lazy bastard. And one of the young men there starts to weep, and he has to compose himself. And he's like, the reason why he's so, like it's tears of joy is because his grandfather died 2 weeks previously. And this was like validation that it was his grandfather because that's what his grandfather would say to him, as a joke, right? So you start to see it's like this being, this first being that came through David, that was something
Very convincing,
right? And then
knows all this inside information.
Exactly, right? So then that happens. And then this kid comes through. His name's Luke. He was this little boy, and he apparently was murdered by his father when he was 5 years old. And they ask questions like, where was he murdered? And apparently the killing took place somewhere near this Council Terrace house was. And again, all very what you'd expect from a Ouija board,
see
from a spirit board.
See how quickly it turns dark?
Oh, Ben.
It goes from the loving grandfather immediately
and the
to
cousin.
An evil murder.
Well, no, not only is it to an evil murder, apparently he was murdered by, as I said, by his father. His father's name was Rupert. Now, Rupert soon took his own life because he felt, I don't know why, guilt or whatever happened, right? So then David comes through again. And when David comes through and Luke comes through, they start yelling, "Stop, Rupert." They're pleading, right? And long story short, you get this impression that Rupert, this father, was now tormenting both David and Luke in the spirit world. And they're getting really freaked out by this because this entity starts manifesting, saying things like, "I, Rupert, evil." This is coming through on the board. I'm like, why do you continue to interact with this board? But, that's neither here nor there. But of course, once they did this, somehow it set something loose. It unleashed something within their home because over the next 4 weeks, this inconspicuous little home, Ben writes, became somehow untethered from the constraints and surety of reality. Inexplicable patches of cold began to appear around the house. Low growling noises began to be heard, and not by just Samantha, but also her siblings and their parents too. From outside the house, a dark figure would be seen hovering in a bedroom window. A family dog would sit and whimper at the foot of the staircase leading to the floor where the banging had been coming from, where footsteps would be heard. What?
All the typical poltergeist activity.
But they, like, using that board somehow unleashed this thing in their home, and it's like, this is like talking boards, spirit boards, this kind of stuff in the 1920s and the post-war, post-First World War, the Great War. It was a parlor trick. Like, it was this fun kind of thing that people would do. So there tends to be this sense of it's not that dangerous. It's just a game. Even was it Milton Bradley? I think that game producer,
Hasbro,
or maybe Hasbro now, but they released a talking board, and it's like, oh no, it's just games. It's like, well, no, we've seen from these stories that it unleashes something. So Cornell was summoned to the home. There was a telephone call, and 2 days later, on the 20th of February, 1991, he makes a long drive from Cambridge into the house in the village, and he said that he speaks to Samantha and interviews other family members. Samantha is insistent that whatever threats had been made by this Rupert, like they were terrifying for her, but he insists. He's like, no. He's like, of all the cases, I've been to quite a number of poltergeist cases, I can tell you very confidently and without bravado that while they're frightening and they're very worrying, not one poltergeist have I encountered where anyone has suffered serious physical damage. Right? And that's true up until a point, right? And I think this was later in his research as well. Like, this is 1992, and he'd been going since the 50s. So it's kind of comforting to know that seems to be the case. But this spectre continued to haunt the family, and it was tormenting these other spirits. It even took over the first floor of Samantha's home. Like, apparently it got to the point where the energy and the feeling around this house totally changed. One of the sisters couldn't even climb the staircase. She would get halfway up the stairs and she would say, no, I just can't. And she would turn around and run, but she could feel like this oppressive sense that was up there. Now, of course, once this starts to continue to manifest, what does the family start to encounter? Strange smells, rotting eggs, flashes of perfume, a shadowy hand that it would appear behind the curtains. One of Samantha's sister describes how one evening she had seen Samantha's 5-year-old son standing at the top of the staircase. Then he simply floated down the stairs before landing on the bottom. His aunt cried out in disbelief, which brought the mother running. When we asked what had happened, he said he had been pushed. When asked of the 5-year-old, well, who? He simply looks up at her and says, the man in black. So now they've got a full form that they're not seeing, but the kid is seeing. Now, the kid, you commonly hear with many of these cases, whether it's poltergeist, past life memories, supernormal phenomena, that it's like kids seem to have these abilities, but they fade after a certain amount of time. We find this is linked in apparently with the research here, particularly by SPR, of the declining psi effect. Now, this starts to tie into where you can see what might be going on here with this mechanism behind the intelligence of paranormal phenomena that deliberately tries to undermine it so that it can't be tracked, it can't be scientifically tested, it can't be regulated. Because children, when they start to get into 7, 8, most of the time, past life memories, the ability to see ghosts and interact with beings, imaginary friends, these sorts of things, potential entities, it just dissipates.
Yeah, it fades away.
Fades away. And sometimes it's quite rapid, but sometimes it takes, a longer time. But the other side of this coin is that when you get people like Tony into people's homes to do this research, you find that the activity stops. The activity can't be replicated. Now, a skeptical standpoint, which is what Tony has approached on many occasions, is that, well, the reason why it's not occurring while there's an investigator in the house is because it's not occurring or it's being hoaxed. Like, there's some hoax that's being pulled, right? And they're not doing it because an investigator with a honed ear and trained eye would know that there's something going on. But that doesn't happen in all cases. In fact, there's many cases where people, have a priest come in and the activity gets worse. It just seems to exacerbate it. And then you get policemen coming in and, tradies and people trying to do things to help in the house, and the activity increases and it's witnessed by more and more people.
There's quite a lot of cases we've dealt with over the years where the person called to the home that has some kind of ability to resolve these issues, i.e. remove the spirit that's behind it, they can see and report that the spirit gets out of the house for their visit and goes somewhere else momentarily.
Correct.
They wait till they're gone and then they're back into the action.
You're absolutely right. I'll get into that in a moment, actually, because there is this weird, it's not a term that's used in this book, but it was quite apparent to me. It's the hitchhiker effect. And it's where the activity will start, and it's really strange. If you've got like a row of terrace houses, and a lot of these cases are from the UK, so you more commonly have these terrace houses, poltergeist phenomena of not just experiencing things floating about, objects apporting, disappearing, reappearing, you'll start to get to the level of the incidents where you have a figure being seen, but people will start seeing the figure moving through walls. And you know what's crazy? So people will see a figure start manifesting as the poltergeist activity ramps up, and then you'll have the neighbor's kids starting to complain about seeing a man walking through the wall.
Oh, right.
But they're just the kids. And the parents are, and because the other family hasn't said anything because they don't want to talk about the fact that their house is infested with the poltergeist, but then the neighbor starts, it's like, how could they know that? But then, of course, then it starts ramping up in the next house and the parents start seeing it. It's like, well, is this some type of weird contagion? Is that what it is? I don't necessarily think it is. I think that it's linked in with Psi, but I'm not so sure that it's being initiated by the Psi abilities of the people that are living in these homes. I think it's more that it is an entity, but it's drawing upon the energy of these people and it's spreading. It's spreading out like a virus. So another example of the declining Psi effect is people with supernatural abilities in themselves. So whether it's telepathy, premonitions, anything that's like that, you put them into a scientifically regulated environment or a testing environment, you find that over time, the more that you test them, the more that you try to investigate, the more that their abilities diminish. It's this declining Psi effect. And in some circumstances, they diminish so much that people don't have problems or don't have the ability to have problems because they can't perceive it. But then give them a few months and then the poltergeist is back. But it's like, did the poltergeist ever leave?
Did it just get bored?
Did it get bored
because got sick of going into the lab?
Because you can't sense it. Right. Like, are you one of these people that can't, sense it? So, with this weird stuff that's going on in Samantha's house, apparently the way that Tony would approach this is like, again, before Ghost Whisperer, that kind of thing, is like, look, I'll attempt to make contact with the presence of the haunting and I'll banish it. I'll try to get rid of it. And apparently he did, apparently for whatever he did. But I found out later on in the book, right, there was this one particular incident where this house had been plagued by the most unusual and egregious, in fact, of poltergeist type activity. It was quite terrifying for people because I think any form of poltergeist activity is terrifying, really. Like even
unless you summon a demon using Hasbro's Ouija board for girls.
Is that real? Did you make that up?
Yeah, no, they released a version for girls.
Oh,
it's the same thing, but it's just all pink and you get a pink planchette.
But that in itself, if you know anything about from what I was just saying, young girls are a higher incidence of being, attacked by this stuff and you're marketing it to girls.
Yeah, but if the board's pink, you just get some Taylor Swift ghost. It's not dangerous at all. Or an effeminate gay man comes through.
You got to get out of the house more, girl. No, this is awful. So 1937, right? So this is the thing. We have to go back and look into Tony's history a little bit as well. 1937, the young Cornell does not believe in poltergeists or spirits or things that go bump in the night. But perhaps without realizing it, he is fascinated by people's relationship with the supernatural. And he has this incident, which I won't go into in great detail here. The book is quite, it's well written, but there's so much stuff that goes on. So if you pick up the book, be aware that there's a lot happening here. But basically it's like, he really had this call to what Ben describes as the modern Western relationship with the supernatural. And I think that's a really good point. It's quite clear. But his experiences came about because he, when he was a kid, so he was having, not a fight, but how boys, tease each other.
This is the author?
This is going back to Tony. Okay. So when Tony was young. So he was having a fight with his friends. And he's like, I don't believe in any of that stuff. It's ridiculous. I'm not scared of it. And of course, all of his friends kind of ridiculed him. And so he's like, I'm going to sleep a night in a graveyard. And his friend's like, oh, come on, as if you're going to do that. He did. He managed to wait until it got dark. He crept out of his house. He spent the night in the graveyard. And as much as there was the bravado and confidence, there was what appears to be a fleeting moment of what am I doing? This is really stupid. But more so just because of the atmosphere creates that, right? He didn't see anything. He didn't experience anything. So for him, he was actually very confident in that, I've proven that there's no such thing as ghosts.
Oh, wow.
Like, Bob,
What a conclusive experiment.
to a 14-year-old boy,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
kind of get that, right? So this kind of continued as he went along. And of course, though, it got him intrigued. But what really set him off and got him really caught up in this and started to change his perception of things was the Nilgiri Hills incident. And this is relatively early in the book, and I'm kind of moving back and chopping through this book, but this is earlier in the book. But he says that his father, George, worked for Shivers & Sons. It was a local firm, one of the largest producers of fruit jams and preserves in the world. It actually allowed him to be a self-made man, and he was very wealthy. He was a very wealthy man, a figure of some local standing. And apparently amongst his peers, he was very much the skeptic, but in private, he was increasingly perplexed by the ability of both his mother and maternal grandmother to be able to perceive the future, right? So you've got a guy who is insisting that he has no interest in any of this stuff, and yet his father and his father's mother and wife, so his mother, have some type of supernatural abilities, what appears to be down to the point that this guy was like, his father was a self-made millionaire or self-made, wealthy person. But it was like he would consult his grandmother or wife on predictions about business decisions.
Oh, wow.
And they would always be true.
Did you say the Nilgiri Hills incident?
Yes. Yeah.
That's in India.
It's India. Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it's India. Yeah.
Because I looked it up today and it was about a 33-year-old man who was killed by an elephant on August the 8th. That's the Nilgiri Hills incident.
Oh, that's weird. No, it's not that. It's not that at all. I mean, unless it was a spectral elephant. But regardless, so, I mean, he had a very varied history, as you can imagine. He was in the military. He was in the Second World War, very decorated from what I understand. A man about his country. And after the Second World War, he was like, obviously he would have seen terrible things. Like he was quite traumatized, including, I think he caught a Japanese officer but then didn't disarmed him, but allowed him to do something silly like keep the weapon holster, so it wasn't like he felt he was completely, dishonored. So he still was a man of integrity. But basically, after all this happened, he got shore leave and he pulled up in India. And when he was in India, he headed into the highlands of the Nilgiri Hills, and this is apparently away from the punishing heat of the southern Indian plain. And apparently it's quite a resort for many Britons. And Britain was still administering India back then. And it had all the trappings of what he says is Raj. He says,
where all the tea plantations are.
Right, yeah. So probably a very beautiful part. Oh, yeah, there you go. Very beautiful part of the world. But as he was there, he hears stories about a holy man that lives in the hills. And he's like, well, since I'm in India and I've seen all the usual fakirs, the snake charmers, the rope climbers, all the Keelian kind of stuff that, he wrote about in some of his earlier works, the side shows. He said he realized that many of them were just tricksters performing for coins. Talented, yes, but disappointing in their deceit. It was mechanical and listless. But when he heard about this elusive, strange hermit in the hills, he apparently had an air of great respect about him. Like the locals, almost like they knew the difference between these street tricksters and this guy. And he would perform feats that couldn't be explained. So Cornell, in his white naval uniform, heads up into the hills. Just starts walking up one day into the hills, and he travels up far. And after being in the military for so long, he expects that people will pay him respect, because it's the hierarchical of the military. So he gets up into the hills and he sees in the distance this man, and he starts yelling out to this man. And he said it was a man appearing in his late 70s or perhaps early 80s. And he's addressing him, and the guy doesn't turn around. He's like, hey, you there. And he's this man in this tattered brown robe. He doesn't turn around. He's actually quite offended. And eventually the guy turns around, and the guy just simply turns around and says to him, do you want a cup of tea? And straight away, Cornell is like the mundanity of the question, caused him to snap back. It's like, no. He spent all day traveling up into the hills. The guy wouldn't acknowledge him. And he said, he didn't even say a thank you. And he says, I was rather cocky. This is what he wrote. He told an SBR audience. I'm sorry, he didn't write it. He told an audience when he said, I was rather cocky. I wasn't very polite at all. And this hermit just says, well, I suppose you want me to perform some magic to entertain you then. And he's like, yes, I've just come all the way here, of course. Give me some magic. And it better not be the Indian rope trick. I just added that, but I would be the same. I don't want that. So the hermit looks over to him, and there's that picture actually that brought up as a great example. So it's a very hilly kind of area. And he looks up at something like this.
Well, it's the perfect place where you would expect a, genuine mountain hermit.
Yeah.
You know, a holy hermit with supernormal abilities to be hiding out in his meditation cave is in this area in India.
Yeah, right. So he looks over, he stands right next to Tony, and he says to him, okay, see the hills up there? Look. And he's looking, and he's like squinting, and he's looking. And he's like, look closer. And he's looking, and he's looking closer. And he's like, there's nothing there. And the next second, in the distance, he sees someone hold their hand up and start waving. And he's like,
is it the guy?
Well, it's
the hermit,
well, he's
right?
like, what are you showing me? And he turns to his side, and he's gone.
Yeah, that's great.
It's the hermit. He's looking. He's like, it's the same guy. He's scanning the ledge, and he's there, standing in the distance on an outcrop far beyond the river that flows in front of them. Now, what's more?
So he's just up here, right at the top of the mountain.
Yeah, right at the top of the mountain. And he said it would have required him to negotiate a dangerous precipice across a rushing river. He's squinting, and he can just make out in the very distance, there's like this big grin on this guy's face. And he's like, how has he done it? And as he thinks, how has he done it? Next to him, he's like, well, did I entertain you? He's like, ah. And the guy's right back. And he looks at him, and he said that his robes are, like, he's stunned, but his robes and feet are bone dry. There's no way that he could have done that. And he's like, you know, and basically, like, he almost insults him in this kind of teacher-disciple way, because he's like, Cornell, how did you do that? What are we doing? And the guy just looks at him and he's like, I want to meditate. And
how much do you think he pays the lookalike to stay up on the mountain all day?
I know that's what you were going to say, because I thought the same thing. I'm like, but apparently where they were, there was not like the guy could have been just like, look over there and run away. Like there was clearly some type of ability going here. But I mean, yeah, maybe it was just some magic trick, but that doesn't seem to be the case. And so ultimately the guy is like you're far too, this is the hermit, you're far too wedded to the materialist understanding of the world for you to learn anything more. So basically, get out, leave. And he does.
Fair enough, yeah. Too many notions.
Yeah. Cornell leaves. He wanders back down, dazed, as he wanders down the mountain. And he's now stripped, though, of his certainty, and he never quite regains it. Like, it never quite comes back. And this does continue to inform his research through the years. And sadly enough, though, it has this recurring theme, though, because he goes back and tells the junior officers when he returns to the ship, and they all ridicule him. They ridicule him. And he's dismissed as telling tales, and, they tried to offer their own rational explanations, which is all kind of reasonable. But for the person who's experienced it, it's a very different effect. And, you feel very lonely. And this is what I think caused Cornell to become the type of researcher that he was. Because as I say, people that have these experiences are left adrift. They're often very lonely. It destroys their lives, and they've got no one that believes them. So at least with Cornell, while he doesn't believe everyone, he does try to listen to what's going on. And, his career as a psychical investigator kind of took off after this. And he had demonstrated, because of these incidents, a sense of empathy and, in his own way, compassion for people that have found themselves caught up in events that they simply cannot understand. So, of course, Cornell began to...
All it took was a teleporting Indian.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
To change his mind.
To change it. So he started hearing stories from, many of his University of Cambridge colleagues about having their encounters with their own ghosts, and he would glean details from the accounts of college students and staff. And he said these things, like he found out that apparently even the college itself, there would be fleeting visions of like a bearded man, an androgynous long-haired apparition at Corpus Christi, a woman in grey. St. Catherine's is where the bearded man would show up. But he said it was always too ambiguous, too old, and too polished, to look into any of these things. So he wanted to dig into it quite deeper. So 1952 is when he got himself involved with the Society for Psychical Research. Now, what also is great about this book is that it gives you some insight into other characters that show up. And one character that I've always had an immense amount of respect for, but I have a different view of him now, is Frank Podmore. So Frank Podmore was involved in Phantasms of the Living, like that great collection of crisis apparitions, that cases that were in that realm of crisis apparitions. And in here, it's highlighted as well that like that whole incident or era of crisis apparitions, where the very the simple crux of it is that before we had the type of instantaneous communication that we have today, someone would run into a family member, that would suddenly appear in their home in solid form, or would, in a dreamlike state, come and kiss them and say goodbye or something like that. And then they'll get a telegram or a telex later on to find out that they had died at precisely that moment. That was the standard kind of crisis apparition. And there's been many theories as to, why that takes place and why it doesn't occur anymore. But really, he said that, with these cases that SBR looked into and what Podmore looked into, people would say, well, look, no, it's just some type of hallucinogenic effect that's connected with the trauma of someone passing away. But the problem is that these crisis apparitions happened, when they researched it, it was 440 times more than chance that these events were taking place. So it can't just simply be coincidence. 440 times more is significantly more than chance. And someone's just like, oh, I think that Uncle Bill is going to die. It doesn't work that way. There's definitely something going on here. But with Podmore at some point was writing and publishing these stories and reports and investigating it. And you have to remember as well, this is a different time where there was the British society where you've got these men that are supposed to be of, a certain societal, they have societal standing and status. Yeah. And they were doing this kind of research. Well, H.G. Wells came in and he was like, basically, the guy's a dickhead. It's it's stupid. I don't know what he's writing. And so H.G. Wells, who was well known, obviously, and written these incredible, it almost completely undermined Podmore. Frank Podmore went from being what appears to be this open-minded psychical researcher looking into poltergeist cases to where he deliberately went to every case. It was it's fake, it's a hoax, it's fake, it's a hoax. He even went back to old cases. He went to 9 cases where it was stunningly, overwhelmingly evident that this wasn't being caused by a hoax. It was oh, I found evidence, now it's a hoax. He totally backtracked after he got dissed by H.G. Wells. And I'm it's just strange. How can a man who saw these things, experienced these things, spoke directly to the witnesses and using a rigorous scientific methodology to rule out hoaxing, deliberately went back because of one diss from H.G. Wells?
It's hard to find an image of him actually in the archives, but I found that one. Where he's just about fucking had it.
That comes up with basically every researcher in this. In this book, at the end, Ben makes this really good point. If you're involved in Sci research, and the subtitle in this book is 140-year investigation of paranormal activity. I didn't see that in the book that I got from Kobo, so that must have been added for another version. But basically, every figure that gets involved in this is either they go full crazy and get so caught up in it that they just believe everything, or they're McFucking had it and want nothing to do with it. It's all shit.
There's two ways out of the paranormal. You either completely lose your mind and go mad, or you turn into Ronald McDonald. A Ronald McDonald at the end of his 40-year service to the restaurant.
That's pretty much what happens. And I'm yeah, I get it, because what ultimately happens, now he says, Ben, and I like the way that Ben approaches this, Tony doesn't really kind of go either of those ways. He still remains, and this is what's quite refreshing, he remains quite open-minded about a lot of this stuff. But in saying that, when I was looking at these cases, pretty much every case he undermined. So then later on, he gets involved with Eric Dingwall. So Eric Dingwall, right, he was, in 1952, he was connected with the Society for Psychical Research. And I'm of course he is. Of course he's into this. Apparently, he was the British Library's assistant keeper of historical, erotic, and sexual practices.
Oh!
And I was of course you are.
It's funny, yeah, if you Google his name, you come up with all these, I don't even know what these are, weird metal bras.
Yeah, he became
What is that?
He became known as Dirty Ding, and he would essentially curate, chastity belts, and you're right, weird, sexual restraint devices.
Where do you put that? What is that? Is that a chastity belt?
I think it is. Yeah, I think it is.
Why has it got teeth on it?
Well, because it goes in.
What?
So that you can't get in.
I don't understand.
Get it? It's because it's upside down, obviously. It goes in and yeah.
Oh, I see.
You see? Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, he would collate.
You can tell I've never seen a woman's vagina before.
So yeah, it's like he was but he was dealing with Cornell, and so he kind of inspired Cornell. But in his own right, I'm kind of being unfair to him. He was a good researcher as well. So this is where he started getting involved in many of these cases. And I'm realizing I'm running a bit long, so I'll skip forward to a few cases.
There's a photo here of all these bros just over his shoulder, waiting for his latest invention or his latest item of his collection.
Just published like a monthly periodical with all the different devices. Yeah.
My new invention is a chin dildo from the 17th century.
No, from the French word lay accommodator. Anyway, so one of the earliest cases in the early 1950s that Tony Cornell was involved with was known as the bell wire poltergeist. I actually really like this. So basically, long story short, there's a family in North London. Their home is haunted by bouts of terrifying banging noises for no other reason than to satisfy his own curiosity. Cornell drives to the address. It's this Victorian home, stately. He wanders in. There's only about 20 of them left. Apparently there were more in that area, but this is one of the few that was left. He gets into the area, and this man opens the door. It was this older man. And the older man, invites him in. He says, yes, and apparently looks rather exhausted. He's like, would you like a cup of tea? And he says, yes, of course. And he comes in and starts talking to him. Tell me, old boy, what's been happening with this poltergeist? And the old man continues to say, well, look, it's very sad, but 2 years ago, my wife died, and then my son and his wife and their baby, they moved into my house. And starting about 6 months ago, we experienced a strange, thumping sound in the house. It was haunting that back bedroom where that young family was staying, my son and daughter-in-law and grandson. And my daughter-in-law is particularly terrified of ghosts. So eventually these disturbances became so frightening that they could no longer take it and fled. And he's like, so here I am, alone in the house. And apparently this poltergeist wouldn't manifest for police or newsmen, but mediums and other people that were in the psychical field that would tour would experience it. And this apparently this psychic showed up, and this psychic medium was like, oh, it's the neglected spirit of a cripple who had died in the back bedroom. And he's like, well, what evidence do you have for that? Oh, I just sense it. So nothing, right? Just bullshit.
Take the psychic's word for it.
Exactly. So, of course, Cornell was fascinated by this. And he's like, well, do you mind if I hang around for a while to see if I can hear, the noises? And he's like, yes, of course you can. So they're hanging around, and the old man kind of disappears. And as soon as the old man disappears, there's this crash upstairs, this enormous crash, and this banging. And he's looking around, and the old man is like standing off to the hallway. And there's all this noise upstairs. And he's like, is that it? He's like, yes, that's what's going on. And he can hear it. And he's like, can you hear the banging? Can you hear it? He's like, yes, I can hear it. Like, what's going on? And he's like he runs upstairs and he opens the room to find nothing. There's nothing going on. So he comes back downstairs and the noise starts again. But Tony's got a good eye, right? And he just happens to notice that the man, this elderly man, kept on running back into the living room. Like, it's just a weird way to back. And he was just like jerking his hand. He was doing something with his hand. And he's like, what are you doing with your hand? He's like, oh, nothing. I was just looking at the fireplace just to make sure that there's no sparks. It's like there's no fire, right? So he wanders over and he looks at the fireplace and he examines it very closely, and he sees that hidden within the side of the chimney is this stiff piece of wire hanging down. It's actually part of an old Victorian bell system for summoning domestic help. Now he yanks it, and the moment that he pulls it, bang, crash, like all the poltergeist stuff upstairs. So starts pulling it again. So all this poltergeist stuff is happening. So clearly, obviously.
What, has he got some kind of contraption hooked up to it?
Yes. He looks at the man. The old man's like, you got me. Okay, you got me. And so he's like, this side, he's like, what possibly possessed you to do this? So the old man takes him upstairs. He pulls back the floorboards, and it reveals that bell wire, which was connected to an old summoning system, is now connected to a bunch of items: tin mugs, iron bars, biscuit tins full of stuff with wooden balls inside. And of course, when you would pull, because it's like the pulley effect, just a very light pull would be enough to cause this to take place, right? It would cause this repeating ghost to start reverberating throughout the house. It's like, why? Why would you have a fake poltergeist?
So easily found out as well.
So easily found out.
You just go up there and see it, the contraption.
Well, no, it was hidden in the floor.
Right.
So he pulled back the floorboards to reveal it.
Oh, I see.
And like I said, it didn't occur when the police were there. It didn't occur when there was other people there, but it occurred when the medium was there. And he's like, and you got to remember as well, I don't think that Tony has been summoned to the house. He's just driven out to it on a whim, right?
So was this guy getting money from this? What was his motivation?
That's what I thought. I really appreciate why he did this. I get this. Families are difficult, right? Families are difficult. They're difficult to navigate. Sometimes you just have assholes in your family, but you don't want to upset another family member. So you're just like, so it turns out, he says, look, he said, when my wife passed away, my son showed up with my daughter-in-law. I don't like my daughter-in-law. She's actually right bloody difficult to deal with, and she's next to impossible. So they moved into the house, and I was convinced that my daughter-in-law was starting to set it up so that I would have to be moved into a home so she could steal the house. So she would complain that he would smoke indoors. She scolded him for drinking sherry. She was basically laying the groundwork, he says, for moving me out and her moving in. They were going to make me become doddery and senile, and they would have put me into a home, obviously involuntarily. So he constructed the poltergeist device to scare his daughter-in-law away. And it worked.
That's actually pretty clever.
Yes, and this stuff was never published, right? So this was hidden for, a long time. But he did say to him, like, Tony's like, look, I understand why you did this, and you don't want to be confined to an old-aged home, so I totally understand that, and I'm not going to betray your secret, but I insist that you must stop this ruse now. And he agreed. And so he told the neighbors that apparently, for whatever reasons he cannot explain, the house is no longer haunted. And it wasn't, because the daughter-in-law had moved out. So like, okay, that's pretty cool. So these sorts of accounts keep on, and when are we at? Okay, a little bit longer. So these reports keep on coming up, but there's one that's really highlighted that came up later in the book that grabbed my attention, and it's of course someone that reaches out to Tony. Let me just skip forward here. Where it is. So much of this stuff, though, is like, there was one particular event as well where poltergeist activity, well, I'm just searching for this one, I'll just tell you this one off the top of my head. Poltergeist activity was occurring in one particular home, and it got so terrifying that Tony was unable to identify what was going on. In many of these cases, like there's like reports of where you'll have it will start off as a standard poltergeist kind of experience, but then people start seeing things like phantom hands. And I thought that's intriguing because, only recently we've been talking about these weird phantom hands that would appear, and there was one particular incident where someone had recorded that their son was being harassed by a poltergeist, and they wandered into the room one day to find that the bed had been shaking, or the child was screaming out because the bed was shaking, and they looked down at the bottom of the bed and there's a spectral baby's hand there, right? So it was small, like it was a small hand, but the hand, as the phenomenon kept on going, the hand aged. So by the time that it was really taking off, it was like a full-on man's hand that was going on in there. And, it would do things like deconstruct people's weapons, to make them feel vulnerable. But in one particular incident that was going on, this is what's so strange about this, where Tony couldn't find that it was a hoax. He couldn't find that there seemed to be any type of psi phenomena connected to it. There did seem to be this mind over matter effect, though, because he brings along this device. And if you recall me saying earlier on the show, he brings along this particular device, and it looks like it's something that's rather exotic. And he places it into the home, and he's like, using this device will stop it from the activity from occurring. The phenomenon will end. And they're like, okay, cool. So the phenomena does. It's like he brings this device. You know what the device is? It's basically
nothing.
It's like a tin filled with sand with a couple of wires sticking out of it.
Yeah.
And it seems to stop the activity from going, but then it only works for a certain period of time. It's like the activity continues to kind of take over. But these instruments, right? So then you get into the incidents of the spider. So you have the Spider Mark 1 and
this was your headline.
Yeah,
the Spider.
The Spider Mark 2. So the Spider, it stands for Spontaneous Psychophysical Incident Data Electronic Recorder.
Oh boy.
So basically what this is, it doesn't look like much. It's a heavy white trunk with CUSPR written on the side of it, but it's remarkably sophisticated in its function. It contains a number of cameras, an infrared camcorder, a tape cassette recorder, floodlights, sophisticated monitors. This was developed in connection with Richard Loosemore. This has been programmed to activate when it detects even the slightest of movements, changes in sound, or changes in temperature. Like this thing is supposed to respond.
Do you have a picture of it?
No, I don't have a picture of it here. But this device was deployed in 1982 at an elderly woman's home in Cambridge. She had died in a bed. And it wasn't in her home. She had died in her home, and the estate auction had sold off a heap of her items to a furniture store, an antique store. The antique store after they acquired her items, started having poltergeist incidents.
Oh.
So items were being thrown around in the shop, vases, crockery, assorted ornaments were being smashed, thrown about. Like all hell had broken loose in this particular location. A glass ashtray and vase were found shattered on a stone hearth. Cups, plates, and saucers would follow, while staff members would actually see items move or fall or even fly through the air, traveling distances of up to 10 feet. The heavy drawers of a mahogany George III tallboy dresser were repeatedly found pulled open, as if someone had been frantically looking for something within. One of the staff members even started to keep a poltergeist log. So
you bring in the spider?
You bring in the spider.
Problem solved.
You bring in the spider wasn't necessarily designed to prevent the activity. That's it was a proper instrument as opposed to what Tony was using before to act as like a placebo, I guess, against poltergeist. They bring in this device, and this device is designed to measure anything, right? So what was odd is that they were saying something like, oh, you got to be careful of these particular items, right? And the antique dealer was like, don't worry about anything expensive, it doesn't smash. And it's like, what? But it would throw about, like a glass ashtray, but anything. So that gets obviously his attention because it's like, why is it not smashing anything expensive?
It's got taste.
Well, has it got taste, or is it that it's just like people that are trying to get attention or are doing a hoax? They're happy to smash cheap stuff, but they're not going to, trash expensive stuff. But that doesn't seem to be the case because on paper, he writes, an antique shop is one of the worst possible places to have a poltergeist outbreak, and yet this spirit seems oddly considerate in the business's overheads and insurance premiums. But Cornell learnt that due to the store closing down anyway, that didn't seem to be the case. Like the store was going to close down and people were going to lose their jobs. So that didn't seem to have any reason for nothing was matching up. So this is why they bring in the spider. And they bring in the Spider Mark 1. There is a Spider Mark 2. They bring in Spider Mark 1. And he writes the results are actually extremely perplexing because they were quite convinced that the whole point of this was to uncover human fraud. It's definitely human fraud for whatever purpose. Maybe because the staff were going to lose their jobs, that someone was bitter on the way out and they were just trying to create trouble. But he says, over the following weeks, the tallboy drawers are found pulled out on numerous occasions by the staff when they arrive to open up the shop. But nothing is captured by the spider ever. Each time the drawers are disturbed, the machine has either been deactivated or it's been turned off by the staff themselves. No, not by the staff. It had been turned off by Cornell and Loosemore themselves to prevent it from overheating, but that knowledge was kept hidden from the staff. So the staff did not know that the spider was turned off, and the drawers were only opened when the device was turned off. And he's like, it seems that somehow it's been deactivated by an unseen hand. The strange thing, though, is that in order to switch off the spider, one would have had to have opened the drawers, opened the lock device and the alarm storeroom, and somehow avoid triggering the sound and motion detectors that would record this incident. It was never recorded. If anyone was going to go into that room, let alone those drawers, it would have been recorded. And yet somehow, if they were doing it, they always did it when the device was powered off, even though they didn't know when it was powered off. He said the drawers seemed to open when it knew that didn't open when it knew that it was being observed, and only acts when the coast is clear. This is a recurring theme that happens in so many of these cases when you bring in researchers that try to monitor this, that try to replicate it, that try to capture evidence of it. It just doesn't play. It's not interested in playing.
Yeah, the intelligence is too crafty.
Very crafty.
So any trap set never work. They're disabled, avoided. You get the same thing in other genres of the paranormal as well, whether it's setting up a trail cam for Bigfoot.
Yes, you're totally right. Yeah,
there's all this activity is triggered, but then you'll just see like a splotch of white on the resulting film, or it's not triggered at all.
Let me bring you to a chapter called The Black Dog. So this is an intriguing.
Can we do it after the break?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, we can. So this really highlights just how complex the phenomenon is, because it does appear that this man is being attacked by a phantom black dog, and yet no one else can see it. So it comes across as being a hoax, but something happens that suggests that it may not be a hoax. So I'll link to this book, Chasing the Dark, 140-year investigation of paranormal activity, in the show notes. I'll link to the Kobo version for Australians and, of course, the Amazon versions for other parts of the world. And check it out. Really, really excellent work.
Yeah, it looks good. And after the break, for our Plus members, we'll be looking at Mysterious Middle River from Joshua S. Bell and Dolores Bell. the unexplained phenomena and forgotten history east of Baltimore. It's got secret military bases, weird Bigfoot activity, giant Nessie-like.
Oh, perfect. Tick. Great. I'm in.
Sea creatures, hoaxes, UFOs, abductions, gnomes.
Gnomes. Okay. You don't have to convince me. I'm in.
That's coming up after the break for our Plus members. If you want to get access, head to mysteriousuniverse.org/plus. Sign up today, help support your favorite show. Of course, you'll get extended editions of these shows every single Friday. And of course, if you're on Plus, I'm trying to bring up the webpage here. If you're on Plus, you'll get access to the exclusive shows that come out every Tuesday as well. You're getting more than double the content if you sign up for Plus. Sign up to the MU Max tier because that gives you the entire access to our back catalogue going back 19 years worth of material. It's all at mysteriousuniverse.org/plus. That's the wrap. Sign up today. If you're on Plus, stick around for the great stuff after the break. For everyone else, we'll catch you next week.